Hi, welcome back to the Art of Unraveling podcast and YouTube channel. I'm Erin McGuire Henson. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to talk about something a little bit deeper, but something very precious to me to talk about. Precious in the way that it's something have struggled with throughout my healing journey, and a lot of my clients do as well. And that is CPTSD and trauma. And if you check out my book, The Art of Unraveling, you can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on my website. Um, I go deep into many different facets of CPTSD, but I just want to just kind of talk about it today. And ironically, I received a message from a client, a student in my Lightworker Academy program, where we do go into the nervous system, the somatic work deeply. And you do it for yourself, but you're also learning how to lead clients through it if you so choose. You can do it as a personal growth program, or you can also do it to become a somatic coach and healer. But she reached out to me and she was like, I'm feeling this way. In fact, I just want to read her message because I think it's a good segue into what I'm talking about today. And, I think things happen for a reason. So it was interesting that she said this. She goes, is CPTSD also tied to self-worth? Like, I know I'm amazing and I know how amazing I am as a girlfriend, mother, and employee, but why is it like this today? Today I'm in a funk because I don't feel so amazing. It's like an emotional roller coaster, and I just have to ride the waves. Like one minute I'm okay, and the next minute I'm crying. Uh, I know that I'm the shit. The next minute I'm like, who the hell do you think you are? And she said, I'm literally a wounded healer, which, by the way, we all are. If you're called to healing work, you probably have Chiron in your astrology chart, which is the wounded healer. And all that means is that you have to tend to your wounds. It means as we tend to our own wounds, we can be that light for others. That's just how it works. But it doesn't mean that we check these boxes and then we're good, especially when it comes to CPTSD. So I text her back and I said, you literally just summed up CPTSD in that paragraph. And she said, I'm laughing. And that sucks. And the reason I said that is because that is CPTSD. So it's I'll finish that thought and then I'm going to go on to explain more about what it is. But with CPTSD, there's many different scenarios that have caused the PTSD, which is why it's called complex PTSD. So with PTSD, let's say somebody was in a war. Well, they're having flashbacks, they're having trauma based around what they experienced in that war. Or if somebody had to, be with their loved one as they passed, or you got in an accident, your PTSD is kind of, yes, it can be multiple scenarios, but it's based around one experience, essentially. This is my understanding. And complex PTSD, this really gets developed in childhood. So if you have complex PTSD, it started in childhood and it's from multiple different traumas over many, many, many years. So we can't pinpoint it was that one time I got yelled at or it was this thing that happened to me. It's literally a conglomeration of many, many things. And then if you have childhood trauma that's not been dealt with, then unfortunately, in my case included here, you can again read about this in my book. I then I didn't process my trauma. I didn't know that I had trauma. This stuff definitely was not something that you talked about back when I was like in high school in the 90s, right? So I then, had low self-worth, and then I attracted more situations that added further trauma to my already traumatized system. And so that's what happens for most of us with childhood trauma and CPTSD is it doesn't get processed. And so we just keep kind of living in these loops where we're looping it through the same situations over and over again. We're attracting the same relationships that are either abusive, emotionally, physically, mentally, whatever. I grew up with a narcissist. So my world was just very chaotic. It was just me and my mom. And a lot of you know my story. I'm not going to go into it too much, but what I'm coming to terms with right now, and that I can really communicate for you, number one is I have I was diagnosed with CPTSD by a therapist. Basically, they've got to, have a diagnosis, right? So that you can claim it on your insurance. So it was for those purposes, but I did ask. I was like, what are you giving me? He's like, "Are you sure you want to know?" I said, "Yes." And he said anxiety disorder and CPTSD, which CPTSD isn't even in the DSM. So it's not even a mental health diagnosis. There's still very little understood about it. There's still a lot of therapists out there that don't understand CPTSD. They're not taught about it. It's still widely misunderstood. And so, I mean, this conversation could go in so many directions. The biggest thing that we want to understand about CPTSD is that often many other diagnoses for mental health are actually CPTSD. So like even ADHD, bipolar, and I'm not saying that this is true across the board, but their CPTSD symptoms can actually show up like many other mental health disorders. And so it's basically having a disorganized attachment, which meant like your parental figure or figures were safe one second and not safe the next. So the system learned to be anxious when they weren't there, but then also push away when they were there. So it's a very confusing development system that gets very disorganized because your system doesn't know what's safe and what's not safe. And so we develop all kinds of survival patterns. This is why I do the work that I do. And sometimes I think, like, I I really am the one to talk about this and write this book and help people with this issue because I've had all of the survival patterns, the freeze response, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the I've just had it all because CPTSD, it's like you can't figure out what's what. And your system feels deeply unsafe. And there's a lot of inner critic that gets developed, a big inner critic. So you're very hard on yourself. That's why she says she can understand she's good enough and she's worthy and that she's the shit on one hand, but then the next day or the next moment, she's feeling like there's something wrong with her. Like, why am I like this? One thing I have shared with her and some of the people in the Lightworker Academy is that, and what I want to share with you now is like looking at CPTSD like it's diabetes, for example. So if you're somebody that really had a lot of childhood trauma and grew up in a really chaotic way, there is going to be this feeling in your day-to-day life, especially when you start learning all the self-help, tools, personal development tools. We start having all this awareness, we start learning all this stuff, and then we kind of start beating ourselves up. We turn that information on ourselves and we're like, well, what's wrong with me? I know this. And yet I still snap at my kids or get in arguments with my partner and regret it later, or ask my I used to ask William my husband all the time, like, are you mad at me? And I still like I'm very aware of that pattern now. That's a very big CPTSD thing. It's like, especially for me in the way I grew up with somebody that was very volatile, calm 1 minute. And I'm not going to say calm, but like normal-ish 1 minute, and then like snapping and freaking out about something the next. So for my nervous system, it's on major hypervigilance. Like, is anybody around me going to, in my words, what I call it, flip out? Because then I'm not safe. So I have to like be hypervigilant of everybody around me at all time. Now, I'm very aware of these patterns. I'm aware where they come from. And I've really calmed all of that down a lot through emotional processing, through really feeling my feelings, through reparenting my inner child, and being more of a secure, stable force for my inner child, for myself, because I never had that growing up. But I can still feel like if William's seeming, because I always want to know, are we empathic or are we just really hyper vigilant? Because I'm very aware when somebody's a little off, and I can feel it in my system. And so I used to just be like, are you mad at me? And now I'm more like, is everything okay? I just want to check in, but I'm not like having to ask every 5 minutes, are you sure it's not something to do with me? Because what will happen for me, and I think a lot of you can relate to this, is because this did happen like a week ago where I could feel William was a little off, or like he was dealing with something. And my first thought is, I've done something to upset him. That is CPTSD, you guys, at its finest. It's me. It's my fault. I'm the problem. I've done something. I need to fix this so that I can stay safe. Underneath all of that is, I'm not safe. So even when he was like, oh no, I'm fine, I didn't believe it, because my system could feel that something was going on. So something really was going on with him, but he's just got a lot of stuff, family and all of this kind of stuff going on. And so I didn't believe him. So I was still like, nope. The thought would come up again later, like, nope, I think he's mad at me about something. I must have said something, and I wasn't doing anything to remedy that. I wasn't acting out on that thought, but I was very aware that the thought was there. So that is just an example. I do talk about this in the book. I think I even have a chapter called Are You Mad at Me? Because it was such a pattern, you guys. So I'm letting you know, like, this stuff is still alive because I had multiple experiences of not knowing as a child what was going on. Nobody explained anything to me. Nobody said, oh, honey, I'm sorry that I'm like, spazzing out over here about this thing. But you know what? That's all my stuff. It's nothing to do with you. I was already born with a sensitive nervous system. So, like, everything to me was ultra amplified, is what I've come to understand. It was like what maybe just like a little upset to somebody else, to my nervous system was like 10 times that amount. So it was very jarring. And what I'm getting more and more, because healing happens in layers, like the onion, right? So I never want to project that like I'm this perfect place and nothing ever upsets me and I float through life easily. It's like, if you have a foundation of childhood trauma or CPTSD, every day is not going to be butterflies, and it's just, that's the same truth for everybody. Like, everybody has days. And so, like, kind of like I told my client, it's just like sometimes we have a day that's a little bit harder, just like a diabetic would have a day that maybe they're numbers were off and they didn't feel well. It's like the diabetic has to manage symptoms, and we have to manage the symptoms of CPTSD. So, what I'm coming to terms with now on my healing journey as I'm unraveling the onion to an even deeper layer, and what I'm looking at is I'm really being with the feelings, the somatic stuff that's coming up for me throughout my days, my weeks, whatever, is and it's I think about like the trauma was traumatic, right? Whatever trauma that was. Somebody screaming and yelling incessantly in your home growing up and not knowing what to do with that. That's traumatic for a little child. But what's even more, I don't want to say even more, what's equally traumatic is not being able to talk to anybody about that. So like to have these experiences that we had as kids, and young adults and grown-ups, and then we just stuff them down. We just repress those feelings because this isn't something you talk about. Like if that's what you grew up with, that's all you know. If nobody in your family is talking about things and being open and having discussions, then you don't learn how to do that. And so that's what I feel like the layer I've started unraveling for myself is some of this stuff is still alive in my system because there was no place for it to be discussed. So the energy never got released. It just stayed in there. And so if you follow me on Instagram, I give you a really great tool there to use to help to use tapping to help you tap through some stuff. But I just want to share this, like, I do think, and maybe I shared this last week, I can't remember, but I do think nervous system work and somatic work has begun to feel very surface level. A lot of people, it's like a buzzword, and so it's like everybody's sharing, heal your nervous system, get into calm, like take some deep breaths, massage your earlobes, and get into your vagus nerve and find relaxation. And it's like those tools are okay, but somatic work is actually so much deeper than that. It's feeling these deeper feelings. It's unraveling the the deeper pieces that are still living in your system. And it doesn't mean we have to be emotionally processing all the time, but it means that we want to make space for these feelings to be present because when we make space for it, then the nervous system begins to expand your internal safety. Why do we want to expand internal safety? Because I can only do things, I can only attract, if we want to talk about true manifestation, I can only attract things to me to the level that I feel safe holding those things. So if there's anywhere in my system that's like feeling unsafe by more money, more clients, you know, more things to hold, then I'm going to energetically push things away or I'm going to self sabotage without knowing that's what I'm doing. I'm going to make excuses. So, and it's because a place in me doesn't feel safe. Or it's because in that, and I haven't built an internal safety. So it's not just about manifesting more stuff to do this work. It's about when I create more space, I'm allowing my nervous system to feel safer with all the feelings because all the feelings deserve a place to be. It's like all the little kids coming and pulling on your pant leg, and you're like, get away. That's like push what we do with our emotions. It's just like some of them are okay, the happy ones are okay, but the others I don't want to deal with, and I'm going to push them away. Everything deserves space. Every emotion gets to have space at the table of you. And when we do that, it's not just that we manifest more, it's that we feel better. We manifest more joy and freedom because we've created this space for the joy and the freedom. So that's kind of the big deal. I wanted to talk more about CPTSD, but I think maybe I will do that next week and get more into kind of the nitty-gritty of it. I went down some different channels today, but all of this conversation is so important to me because when we when we're not feeling things, we're in this contracted state, and in a contracted state, we can't again open up to receive because we're contracted. We're like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to deal with that. I just want things to go the way I want them to go, or whatever it is. So that's kind of just a long-winded way. There is one thing I wanted to touch on with CPTSD before I end this conversation, and that is, just another difference between PTSD and CPTSD. PTSD is when you have a flashback, it's to a memory of that thing, the car crash or the war or the situation or whatever. It's a specific thing that we're usually flashing back to. With CPTSD, you have what's called emotional flashbacks. And so you don't even know you're flashing back because there's oftentimes not a memory, but there's a feeling. And it's typically a feeling of being helpless or powerless in the situation that you're in, which is the case when we're children and we grow up in chaos. We don't have the ability to process it. So when those flashbacks happen, they're often very dysregulating, and then they're usually followed by a deeper level of shame and what's wrong with me and all of the inner critic statements that go along with that. So that's just another difference about CPTSD. Lots of emotional dysregulation and lots of back and forth between I know I'm this, but I'm also this, and what's wrong with me, and why can't I, and this kind of whirlwind. And so, if we can pause in the whirlwind and we can just recognize that a part of us is feeling helpless or is feeling overwhelmed, and that we're really just emotionally flashing back to being that helpless child that had to just acquiesce to whatever was going on in your environment, and just sit with that child for a second and just see them, hear them, and just sit with them like in your mind's eye. Imagine you can just be there with them for a second and hold their hand, hug them, or let them sit in your lap if any of that feels okay to you, and just allow yourself to be present with them. That is doing some of the deeper work. And then for me, what's really been helpful is to also recognize how scary that must have been to be in that situation. Because as adults, we don't really think about that. We're like, yeah, I would walk out if somebody started doing that now. Like if I was in a room with my mom and she started flipping out, I'd be like, I'm out, right? I don't have to put up with that anymore. I have boundaries. But as children, we didn't get to do that. We literally lived a war every single day. It was like, I had somebody tell me this once, like, imagine going to war every day. That's growing up in trauma. So it's every day. There's no escaping it. You don't escape childhood in those situations. You learn to adapt and cope and survive. So the real work begins when we start being with the child that had to go through that. And that's tough. It's not always something we want to do on our own, but it can be done on your own. Grab my book, The Art of Unraveling, and I do go into several different healing techniques in that book, as well as lots of my own personal stories and information that can help you, and it can become a companion on your healing journey. I also have my new Light Leader Collective membership. It's a monthly membership where each month you get a 1.5 hour masterclass workshop with myself around some sort of somatic healing process or tools or techniques that I share, subconscious reprogramming, lots of different things. Each month we'll be doing that. And then I'll do a somatic movement practice also throughout the month. So that's just a really great way if you're like, I don't have a lot of time, but I want some support. And that's $33.33 a month. I also have my somatic coaching certification program. It's an embodied spiritual somatic coaching certification program. That starts next month and it's 3 months long. And this is a deep dive into the nervous system, into somatic work from an embodied spiritual place where we really are going to understand our system individually because everybody's system is differently. We're going to go deeper into trauma healing and also our intuition and how that plays a part in the healing journey as well. And I'm laughing because my cat is literally sticking his paw under the door because he really wants me to open the door. But that's my somatic coaching certification program. That is 3 months. It can be done as a personal growth journey or as if you want to become a coach trained in somatic and trauma informed. And that's part of my Lightworker Academy. So you can do the whole 8 month program of Lightworker Academy. This would be the first 3 months of it, or you can do it on its own. So hopefully I've made all those options clear. So you've got your Light Leader Collective. That's just my monthly membership that we do a 1.5 hour per month live masterclass workshop for those of you that want deeper healing. This is for empaths, it's for light workers, it's for healers on a healing journey. Or you've got the 3 month somatic coaching certification program, or the full light worker 8 month journey as well. So just wanted to share those options for you. If anything sounds like something you want more information on, you can shoot me a message on Instagram or below this video or podcast. There'll be a way to contact me via email. I thank you so much for being here. If you're on a healing journey, definitely grab my book, The Art of Unraveling. It will be your guide and companion. And I hope I see you somewhere in my world again. Thank you so much for being here.